Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc. And one of the challenges that we have in working with people in conflict is how to move them out of a place of being stuck into a place of being open enough to consider the possibilities for a new way moving forward. And that's where our guest today comes into play, because Michael Fraidenburg, mediator extraordinaire, trainer, communicator from the state of Washington, focuses on the art of asking questions to get past no when people are resistant to agree. It's really a skill, and it is a mindset. And it's also about timing, strategy, and awareness. And actually much more. But those are some key things that really come into criticality in the height of people in conflict. I'm excited to bring him to you. Don't go away. We're getting started right now. Welcome today, Michael Fraidenburg.
Thanks very much. It's just a thrill to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you as well. One of the things I love about hosting this podcast are the wonderful people I get to meet worldwide, and to learn from the different perspectives that people bring to the table, given their own experiences around people in conflict, being a mediator, being a leader, dealing with people in conflict. And so I believe strongly in the art of asking questions. And so I'm really excited to learn even more. I've read through your ebook, so to speak, and we'll talk more about that, the art of asking questions to get past no. And so, Michael, I know that you have been a mediator for a long time in the state of Washington. Right?
That's correct. Yep.
And you are the principal of an organization called the Cooperation Company.
I am.
What a great title for a company. I think that's great. Yeah.
For a company that does conflict resolution. It's a pretty good fit, you know.
Well, cooperation, collaboration, communication, it goes on. Yeah. And so with that, I can see, you not only have trained in a lot of different mediation models and certifications, but you also train in different topics. And so I'd like to just start off in having you speak a little bit about some of the training you've completed, some of the training you offer.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So my origin in a first career is working with people who are very technically oriented and scientists.
Okay.
And they're really, of course, top-notch in those quantitative and excessively detailed skills, but they're not good at working in environments where there's a lot of conflict. So I morphed that into an interest in doing training for those folks. So a good share of the beginning part of my training caseload were those kinds of folks, people who were on task teams or discovery teams, those kinds of things, but they were cross-disciplinary or cross-agency or cross-stakeholder groups, and they had to figure out a way to work together. Since then, it's broadened out to where it's customer-based now, pretty much government employees and public servants in general, not just science technical types of folks. So if you're a policymaker and you're struggling, like in one issue I'm working on now between ranchers and people who worry about conserving water, then as that policymaker, I come in and I give you some training about how to manage those situations.
Wow, fascinating. You're dealing with some big issues then, particularly in the Northwest regarding water. Yeah,
one of the most emotional animal species in the world is salmon. And so I've done a lot of work on salmon.
Oh, we love our salmon, so we want to keep that around too. So I'm glad you're working through those issues for us. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, from your mediation experience, is that how do you, or what significance, what impact do you find in why even to use questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I like to, so let me go into trainer mode and put you into one of my workshops. Here's why. And let me pose a question to you and all your viewers, and see where your brain goes. What color is your house? Could you not think of an answer to that question? So, first and foremost, our brains seem to be hardwired that when they are presented a question, we have an instinct to try to answer it. So imagine you've got some folks who are squabbling over whatever issue it might be. They're caught up in the moment or anxiety and frustration and sometimes anger over their history. They're not thinking very expansively. So they're thinking about all that history and about their current situation. If you can pause the action and say, what's important to you? Or what is the way forward that would work for everybody? Some sort of future-oriented, collaborative, worded question. They stop thinking about their history. They stop thinking about their current heartache, and they come to you with some thinking anyway about, well, I wonder what it would take. And then once you get those kind of answers, you can sometimes work with that material they give you. So I think the importance of asking questions is it's a thought stopper, and then it casts people's thinking someplace you want it to go, which for me in mediations is usually about the future and about what does collaboration look like in the future.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, because that's a great example. And I actually have to say I stopped to pause because they're in the process of painting my house right now. It's like, what color is it? But I did, but I did stop. So yeah. And yet,
for most people, that question works.
Well, it's unusual times. What can I say? But I do appreciate that because it's sort of human instinct that we want to be helpful. We want to give an answer when asked a question. Yeah. And so I know I do a lot around using open-ended versus closed-ended questions. And what I heard you provide examples of were what I call open-ended questions or probing questions. Yeah. And can you say more about that?
You bet. My image, and when I draw on a flip chart or a whiteboard when I'm talking about it, is between open-ended and closed-ended questions as me as an intervener, neutral third party is trying to be helpful. When I don't have enough raw material to work with, I need to ask a question that opens up thinking, opens up options, opens up possibilities. So I'll ask open-ended questions like that. However, when people have started to converge and they start getting their minds around what an agreement might look like, then I start asking those closed-ended questions, those questions that can be answered with yes or no, or a categorical answer like the amount of money is whatever amount it is. And so get them to converge toward an answer. So when I need raw material with the group, for a group to work with, open-ended questions. When I need them to start converging, closed-ended questions.
A beautiful example of both. Thank you so much, because how we use questions is particularly important as well, because sometimes we will ask we'll ask closed-ended questions when we really want more information. And depending upon the person on the other side, they'll either give you a yes or no when you're expecting more, and that could be conflictual right there, right?
That is a moment of silence that I do not cherish. I don't like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just glancing over to your ebook over to my right here, and I see where you pose that question: what color is your house? And but I see a couple of quotes that you have here, which I just love, and I'm going to go ahead and share them with our audience. This is from James Thurber. It is better to know some of the questions than all of the answers. I love that. And then Claude Levi-Strauss says the wise person doesn't give right answers. He or she poses the right questions.
Nice, huh?
Yeah, and that totally emphasizes what you just talked about then, is that when you want to open it up for information to get people talking, then really the art of asking those open, probing questions is key, because now you're eliciting information that the other person can hear.
It's good for me too, because I'm human like everybody else, and I'll get sucked into people's conflicts, and I want to be helpful. So I have the risk, like everybody does who does the kind of work you and I do, of trying to help them formulate an answer or a solution. When reality is, solution finding is their work. My work is to help them facilitate that so they can help themselves. And so when I get sucked into get sucked into the possibility that I want to start providing solutions for them, I thought stop myself and say, wait a minute, why don't you ask a question instead? That question can be probing about, well, what solutions will work for you and so forth. So it helps me kind of stay in role and be clear, draw those boundaries so I stay in my neutral role and be helpful, not a problem solver, to support them.
Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction, because, particularly if we've got a lot of experience and we've seen lots of cases that we've mediated,
Mhm.
we may well be able to see a good solution based on somebody else's conflict that may apply here, and so it is important to be mindful about not crossing that threshold of being a neutral into being directive and telling them how to solve it.
Right.
Yep. And so given what you've already described as far as when to use questions, what's the timing in your mediation process? Just when do you start opening up the situation with those questions?
Well, I don't know if you use the same model that I use, but there's a common 6 or 7 step model for taking people through a mediation. And mostly open-ended questions are in the front of the sequence we're taking people through. What brought us here? What needs to be fixed? What does success look like? Those kinds of questions up front are good to get that landscape set out. And then typically closed-ended questions come towards the end when actually you're negotiating a solution. Somebody offers a set of criteria that they're willing to do a work project by, or they offer an amount of money to solve a dispute. Those are questions that are ripe of a closed-ended nature. You turn to the other party and say, can something that's in the ballpark of that figure work for you? Or does that figure work for you? Doing those kinds of things. So it's not perfect. You're using questions in both open-ended and closed-ended questions all the time. But in the overall process, open-ended questions tend to come earlier, closed-ended later in the dispute resolution process.
Okay, great. That's helpful to know, because I think sometimes people may particularly people new to the field of mediation may find it's like, well, when do I do this, and what's the perfect timing? And in a way, like you said, it's not so much about perfect timing, but it's really about tracking where people are and being acutely aware of when more information is still needed and when it's time to start narrowing things down.
Yeah, it can be helpful when in those really overt situations when you get attacking behavior in the room that you're in. I had a mediation one time between a young couple, and one of the parties, when I posed the open-ended question, what do you need to have us accomplish here at this session? One of the parties said, I need the other person to admit they're a bad person. Where do you go with that? Well, another open-ended question. Well, I can see you got a lot of energy around that. I want you to turn to me and just talk to me and tell me what's going on. What's behind that maybe I need to understand so I can be helpful as a mediator here. So when you get attacking behavior, it can be one to redirect it in a little safer way and tone down that whole poisonous environment that could come up if you get that really kind of dysfunctional behavior.
Yeah, I like what you had to say as far as redirecting behavior, because I know one of the things that I oftentimes will say when I'm working with mediators, is the power of words, and that we want to be mindful about not repeating or emphasizing the negative words that people have used, because that just reinforces that notion in that person's mind, but also can have a very deleterious effect on the other person who's hearing them spoken about in those negative kind of ways, and so that can further entrench people. Yeah,
definitely. Of course, we got the ground rules about no inflammatory language and that sort of things, but the reality is people who are coming to visit with you about their conflict have a lot of emotional baggage they're bringing into, and that will sometimes spill over and cause that kind of behavior. So being able to redirect it like that is a helpful skill, and questions are one of several good techniques you can use to do that.
Yeah. I'm curious, given what you just described as far as redirecting that behavior and having the person elaborate on their comment, is that something that you would do in a breakout session, a caucus, or is that something that you would explore actually with the other person there?
Yes and no. Typically, it's in the session with everybody in the room, because everybody needs to hear it. Mm-hmm. If, however, under 2 conditions, I can't make that happen in a productive way, then I'll take it to caucus. And those conditions are, if I have a suspicion, I just can't turn the negative person off. If asking them an open-ended, diplomatically worded question is just not going to resonate with them, and they're not going to come and be helpful in answering it that way, go to caucus. But then there are sometimes material that's really deep and really private and is something that one party doesn't want to disclose. And so that'll go to caucus, and I'll ask them those kinds of a little bit more pointedly worded questions to get them to disclose what's going on, because, of course, caucus is doubly confidential. You as a mediator don't disclose what happened in the caucus. So open session first is always kind of a good first try, but there's a couple of conditions, and that's, can the other party positively respond to that, or do they have something that's so deep-seated they don't feel they can disclose it in open session?
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that, because again, it goes back to, the mediator really, paying attention to, where they perceive people coming from, and using their instincts as well as their skills to, make the, I don't want to say right choices, but make the appropriate choices to where they guide the process. And yeah. Again, I'm one of the questions I want to ask actually comes from your own ebook. What are the questions that prompt ideas, information, and proposals and help them get past their fears into potential solutions? Can you share with us some examples around that?
Sure. Let's begin with an acronym called OPTIONS and unpack it one letter at a time. Only proposals that meet others' needs succeed. Oh. And so with that in mind, then, when you need solution ideas out on the table, I usually begin with a motivational speech like that. And it's not overt, and I'm not being overpowering of these folks, but I am reminding them that the conversation that I'm mediating is really all about developing options, and they have some dimensions that they need to be workable with both parties. So I set that as a ground rule. With that ground rule in place, and the kinds of questions that I will add, and that I will ask is like, tell me what are just the classic brainstorming question works remarkably well still. So if it got a history that people have talked to you about in a good question to elicit ideas is, let's brainstorm 3 different ideas that would work to solve this problem between you two. So just that classic, let's get our minds in an idea generation phase question will work. Other questions that I use to generate ideas is, if we implemented a solution that would work for you, what are the 3 elements that needs to go into it? Then I'll turn to the other party, and instead of asking them the same question, I will ask them a question: how can we build on those 3 ideas so they are workable for you and you can do okay with them? Something like that. So those are 2 ideas: brainstorming, and then ask somebody to tell you what's their solution, and then turn to the other party and ask them how to improve on that solution, something like that.
Okay. Great suggestion. I would like to go back to your acronym of options. Could you say that again?
Sure. Just line up options vertically on a sheet of paper, and it's only proposals that include others' needs survive. Only proposals that include others' needs survive.
Okay, great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's not mine. I'm spacing on his name right now, but unfortunately, he's left the earth. We had a really inspiring Chief Justice of our state Supreme Court who used to come and train us mediators how to do these kinds of things. So credit to him for that fun acronym.
Well, acronyms are a great way to remember, steps and things to do. And I love the use of acronyms myself. So, yeah, I'm curious. You actually outline 4 steps in your ebook. And I'd like you to let our viewers and listeners know what those steps are, and so they might be encouraged to download your ebook and find out more on how to do this.
Sure, happy to do it. So there's the inspiration for this notion that there's 4 steps is that my vision and the vision of the co-mediators that I work with in my world is that when you're helping people as a third party with their dispute, you're doing your best job when you can think of not what question you want to ask, but what sequence you need to take people through to get them to an offer back and forth on the table that'll work. So the motivation or the inspiration for this 4-step process is, well, what does a sequence like that look like built around the notion of questions? The first step in doing that is that you need to find the essential concerns that the parties have. And we haven't had a chance to mediate, Debra, but again, in my world, we make a distinction between issues and interests. And so issues are the things that people complain about. It's the money, it's the fence being built on the wrong side of the property line, it's that kind of thing. But behind those issues are some underlying interests that they have. And so it's like, I don't feel respected, I don't feel safe, I feel insecure, those kinds of questions. So the first step in the process is you need to disclose what their essential concerns are. And those typically are underlying interests. And they're soft and squishy, but they're real. The second step is you need to make the broken status quo visible. It's been a revelation for me to realize that when people come into the meeting room and they've been fighting for a year or 2 years or even 3 years, they don't like it, but they've grown used to the status quo. And so they have done the best they can do with it. So they're surviving, not well, but they're surviving. And so what we need to do is back people up and make them have some level of realization that the status quo, it really is broken. It's not just endurable, it's broken, and there's a better way. So that's the second step, is make the broken status quo visible to the parties. The third step is make the ideas safe for people to work with. I have a lapel button hanging up on my other monitor. I wish you were in person. I'd give you a button.
Take it.
Hand it over. And it's a little phrase that I find helpful, and I use it in my training all the time. It's you're looking for, in step 3, you're looking for solutions that are good enough for now and safe enough to try. So that's the phrase that's on the button. Mm-hmm. So in step 3, when you're trying to make ideas safe, you're building them a golden bridge to a future. But that golden bridge has got to deliver 2 things. It's got to deliver a solution that's at least good enough, not perfect, but at least good enough. And it has to be a solution that they feel comfortable or that it's safe enough for them to give it a try. So step 3 is all about building that golden bridge. And then step 4 is where most of the closed-ended question actions occur. And step 4 is engage forward movement. And that's really about how you ask the questions for closure for these folks. So that's where you get kind of down and dirty, but of course with a ton of diplomacy of getting folks to say, I would like to make this offer, or and get the other party to react to it, or get them to make a request. Do you have a request from the other party? Get that on the table and see if you can negotiate with it. Get those narrowed down to something like it's this amount of money and it's this time of the payment, and those kinds of details. And you start asking the questions for engaging forward movement. Are you ready to move into a future that can make things better by agreeing to these 3 points that you just talked about? Some sort of closed question like that. So those are the 4 steps. I find it helpful to think about that way, but then my brain is wired a little funny sometimes. So.
Well, I always like to say to people, is that, I also take the time to go through the steps of the process, because it's like a roadmap.
Yeah.
If you have some idea of markers and, exit numbers and things like that, now you have a roadmap. You can stay on track, and you can use that as a guide to make sure that you're navigating through all the essential pieces. And so, your 4-step process does that marvelously too. And I like the emphasis on your phrasing matters. I like to talk about words matter.
Words matter.
Yeah. So, you've given some excellent tips as far as, how to move people forward with your questioning. But what happens when people don't agree?
Yeah, so I don't give up. So I don't know about you. This is a pop quiz. How many times does somebody say no before you actually believe them in your mediations? See, if they say no, you never believe it the first time. I never believe it the second or third time. I keep working with it. Yeah. And what I do is, again, trying to not get seduced into the notion of I got to fix their problem. If I get a no, I'll turn it to the other party, and turn it to the party who is objecting and say, what would it take? Or why not? So I just wrote a blog post about asking the question, why not? You get a no from somebody in one of your meetings. It's about facilitating meetings. You get a no. Well, where can you go with that? Turn to the other party with diplomacy and say, why not? Why can't you go along with this? So you're doing something like that to get them to disclose what are their objections. And then if you can get a list of those, then we can go back into my questioning sequence or anything that works that way and ask them, how do you get those needs met? Because a blanket no is awful hard to facilitate or to mediate. But a no that's compartmentalized into 2 or 3 separate objections gives you some raw material you can work with. So don't accept those blanket no's is the very first bit of advice I've got. I may have lost track of your question. I don't know. I might need a reminder.
Well, before I restate the question I had for you, it was all about when people don't agree. One of the things that I have found helpful, and one of my early mentors in the field, is I actually start off a mediation, encouraging, thinking outside the box and imagining leaving our mediation today with this behind you. And so I may come back to that, 2 or 3 or more times, as needed throughout the course of the mediation. And particularly if I do get a no. Well, I hear your no. And yet one of the ground rules that we talked about was, coming in good faith and thinking outside the box. Yeah. And so what would it take to help get past that no? Imagine what this would look like if that no were a yes. And leaving our meeting today with this done.
Yeah. You're living all in the world that's so helpful for mediators like you is you're encouraging people to think in positive future condition thinking instead of thinking in the history and thinking about their current heartache. If you can get them thinking about a positive future condition is possible, and then what does that look like? That's very good.
Well, I'm curious because, the art of asking questions, and that's exactly what I call it, the art, because it is an art. There's also a science of how you do it, if you understand the mechanics of it. And so asking questions appropriately, effectively, and with good timing is a learned skill. Yeah. And so I'd like your input as far as how does someone get better at the art of using questions to encourage agreement? What suggestions do you have?
Well, I have several. There's probably no real magic in my answers, but just be more deliberate and conscious about reaching out and seeking that continuous improvement opportunity. First is decide you're going to do it and take my work, or there's a lot of people who've thought about the kinds of conversation you're having. Find what you like and make a note or two about, well, what are specific skills that you would like to practice? In a moment, I can give you an example of a golden question that I use all the time. That's a good practice item. So make a conscious effort to decide what skill you're going to practice on one skill at a time. Then don't go it alone if you possibly can. So look for mentors. If you're involved in an organization like I volunteer at my local dispute resolution center, we have all kinds of continuing education opportunities. And so we'll set up like an hour just practicing a specific skill, like perfecting the way we answer questions. So do that. The third thing is it probably is actually a faster learning experience for you if you can find somebody to teach. So be a mentor or volunteer to teach somebody else. Or if you're working with your teenager, work with them and improving the way they interact with their peers in high school or whatever that might be. So be a teacher is a fast road to learning how to do these sorts of things. And then the usual pat answer is start reading about how to do these sorts of things. There is a lot of material about the nature of how you get people to agree, and embedded in that is advice about how to do questions. Let me tell you about my favorite question. So you asked in the beginning of this little exchange here about how do I get people to open up ideas. And let me share with you the favorite of 3 golden questions that I and my colleagues here in my community use all the time. If I need people who have given me a no to open up and give me some material to work with, then my favorite question is the question of, what do you most want to see happen? And so that gets people thinking future-oriented instead of in the past, and it gets them to take a blanket no and compartmentalize it down to hopefully some chunks I can work with. So my favorite question to get ideas coming back towards me that I might be able to work with is to ask, what do you most want to see happen? There's a tweak to it that is very important, though. Remember now, that's not the only person in the room. You've got the other party or other parties in the room. So I will be careful if the situation is right, and it usually is, to modify that question this way. What do you most want to see happen that will work for you and work for everybody else at the same time? Layering that additional verbiage into the question gives the objecting party, the party who said no, a responsibility to meet the needs of the other people in the room. So they don't just get to say, this is what I want. Hopefully they're going to say, this is what I need, and I think it will work for the other party at the same time. That's what you're striving for.
Excellent. Those are all wonderful tips and guidelines to consider. You know, what you were just saying there, Mike, it reminded me of a mediation I did just last week, in fact, and it's been going on for about 3 years, and a lot of blame and shame. It's the organization. And true enough, there were enough consultants that come in prior to me that did identify, there are organizational issues. And fortunately, the organization was starting to take action on those things. But the conflict between two key mid-level leaders was ongoing. And this was one where we actually did a co-mediation. I hadn't done one for a while, and we did so because of some gender and racial and some other underlying generational issues. And so we felt it was best to have a co-mediation team. And so one of the things, building on your art of open-ended questions, was that, we recognize that, you both have said today, as well as, in past efforts, that there are some organizational issues. And quite frankly, from what I've seen, I agree. And, and it sounds like the organization is taking action on those things. And yet we know organizational change is a good, 2-3 year process. And so the question then for you here now is that while the organization is working on some things and you have a change in leadership, what can be done to improve the working relationship between the two of you?
Right.
That's what we're here to focus on today.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. That's to put pointed terms on it, that's my in spite of question. What can you do in spite of all these outside problems that you really don't have control over in the moment? But you're so much more artful at wording that.
It just worked, but that, because they kept, one particular party kept saying, well, it's the organization. Well, we get that. But how do you two work better together? Because one reported together, and so it was a really we got it resolved, and so it was a great experience. Yeah. And I'm wondering, what sort of closing remarks would you have in terms of given your extensive skills and experience of being a mediator, the types of mediations that you've done? I'm seeing everything from family mediation, large-scale organizational mediation, parent-team mediation, restorative justice mediation, transformational conflict coaching. If there were 2 or 3 key things that you would want to share as far as nuggets that you would like to pass on to not just mediators, but people who deal with people in conflict, what might those be?
Well, that's a really good question here. So let me extemporaneously try to give something that's helpful here. Of course, the first is to try, and I covered that before about trying to get better. It's creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you watch these conflicts unfolding in front of yourself, and you're a person that has opportunity to do something and do nothing, the self-fulfilling prophecy is the conflict's never going to end. So if you're invested in making the world a better place, it's a good investment of emotional energy and skills development and time to do all those sorts of things. So that's my little motivational speech. This is extremely worthwhile work. So please do it, because I need you in my world. The other is that I've found it useful to improve my diagnostic skills about trying to name the kinds of conflicts that I'm encountering. But there's material around that describes how you put a name to the different kind of conflict. So there are conflicts that are about material issues. So that's money, time, property, those kinds of things. There are conflicts about relationship issues. People have a history of not getting along very well together. There's conflicts about institutional problems. The case history related is a good example, and others. But the key and most difficult one is that there are value conflicts. And so we are all struggling with how to get around the notion of the divided values in America anyway, creating more and more conflicts that we have to try to navigate in some way. So a nugget for improvement is don't just walk into a situation and say, ooh, there's conflict here. Work on your ability to diagnose what kind of conflict is on the table, because if you can name it, you can tame it. And if you can put a name on it, you've got a pathway or a road you can create to try to deal with it. If it's a value conflict, I go one direction. If it's a materials conflict, time, money, property, I go a different direction. So trying to parse out what is the nature of the conflict that is diagnosed is a really helpful skill as well.
Well, that's great, because I like to, add to that, I like to say there are three sources of conflict: organizational, systems, processes, or technology, and then people. Nice. And then there are three types of conflicts. Just like you said, values is one, the relationship conflicts are another, and then the task conflicts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so, it sort of ties into what you just said. And so, again, I like to think in threes, and I like to use acronyms, so it helps me remember things better. But yeah. So, Michael, this has just been absolutely delightful to have you on. I mean, your wisdom and years of experience are quite evident in how you, elaborate on things. And, I was really intrigued by your ebook, and encourage our viewers and listeners to download it so that they can use it for their own learning. And Michael, if people were interested in your training, how would they get in touch with you, or your services for that matter?
Yeah, you bet. Two websites. One is cooperationcompany.com. Okay. And in the last 2 years, coincidentally with the pandemic, I've been emphasizing online meeting management skills. I actually wrote a book about it, and there's a website on the work I do, training people how to run better online meetings. It's called masteringonlinemeetings.com, and there's plenty of links in there to send me emails and that kind of thing. Happy to talk with anybody. I should say that in the Mastering Online Meetings website is an offer for a free hour coaching call if somebody wants to do that. Happy to do that for anybody.
Well, thank you so much. I think what we've shared today is a vast amount of knowledge as far as the art of questions and how they can be used not only in mediation but any kind of conversation.
Great.
Well.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful experience. So thanks for the invitation. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, thank you, Mike.
See you in the mediation room, okay?
Yes, we will. Okay, very good. I look forward to that. That's, again, the great thing I love about being a host of this podcast. I meet some highly skilled, wonderful people. I've got all kinds of ideas for future collaborations. So we will see you again, Michael.
All right. Thanks very much.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc, decoding the conflict mindset. And you just gained some valuable tips from Michael on how to do that. So if you want to know about future podcasts, please sign up, subscribe right below, and be the first to know about our next guest speaker. Well, we just heard from Michael Fraidenburg about the art of asking powerful questions and how to move parties forward in conflict and dispute resolution. Well, don't go away. And if you haven't already, subscribe now, because you will want to know about our next guest speaker, Susan Guthrie. Susan is actually, I consider, the online diva of virtual mediation. And not only is she a diva in virtual mediation, being there way ahead of the game than many of us, been at it for several years, she also has become an expert in teaching others how to effectively engage using technology to perform the art of mediation. Many of us thought it was not possible back in the beginning of the pandemic, but we now know it is. So listen and learn about where we were a couple of years ago and where we are now. And the evolution, it continues to evolve. And so find out Susan's tips and techniques for how we stay abreast and ethically so, given our mediation standards of practice. So again, sign up, come back and listen. Susan will be upcoming next.